Greetings, Culture Warriors. It is I, Jeff Vieira, the author of Culture is Everything, and your host for this latest dispatch from the front. Back to the news of the business world today. This is a story by Dalvin Brown. Former high-ranking Pinterest executive sues the company, alleging gender discrimination. The former chief operating officer of Pinterest is suing the company, alleging gender discrimination and wrongful termination. In a suit filed in California on Tuesday, Francoise Brouwer says she was offered a less favorable pay structure than her male peers. She also claimed that the head of the company's human resources department made sexist comments to her when she brought up her concerns, alleging she was wrongfully fired in April for speaking out. Instead of taking her complaint seriously, investigating it properly, and doing the work to add her concerns about gender discrimination and hostility, Pinterest fired Mrs. Brouwer to protect the comfort of her male peers, reads an excerpt from the lawsuit posted on Scribd by the outlet TechCrunch. USA Today reached out to Pinterest for comment, but the company has not yet responded. A Pinterest spokesperson told the New York Times that it's reviewing the lawsuit, adding that the company wants all of our employees to feel included and supported. Pinterest is a go-to place on the internet for recipes, outfit inspiration, and home decorating tips. In June, the company reported roughly 400 million monthly active users, most of whom are women. Still, its workplace is far from perfect, Brouwer said in an open letter on Medium.com the day the lawsuit was filed. The company is steered by men with little input from female executives, she said in the post. Pinterest female executives, even at the highest levels, are marginalized, excluded, and silenced. The microblogging's platform grew from $500 million to $1.1 billion during the 2 years that she worked there, Brouwer said. She went on to say that she believes she was let go for speaking out about the rampant discrimination, hostile work environment, and misogyny that permeates Pinterest. All right, so what do we make of this story, especially applying the lens of culture and values, as we are wont to do? Well, ordinarily, you take a look at this and you say, it's probably just a disgruntled, fired employee kind of throwing something at the wall to see if they can shake a settlement out of Pinterest. But there's a couple of interesting elements to this. Number one is that Pinterest, as noted, is a social media platform that's pretty overwhelmingly dominated by women. It's a way for women to easily kind of share their interests, make lists of things they would like to get or try, or things that they like from a fashion or a decorating perspective. It's a good place for those kind of things. Sometimes, you see hobby and craft stuff on there. As a red-blooded American male, I have not spent a lot of time on Pinterest, so I'm only going off the few minutes that I've seen. But that's kind of what it seems to be geared around. Now, that said, it is a platform. It is a technology-driven company. It is a social media company. I would imagine that it probably has the same talent pool that other big tech companies draw from. And so you're going to see a lot of software engineers associated with the company. And software engineers are largely males. Interestingly, from Silicon Valley, largely left-wing males of the sort who claim to be feminists themselves. And so it's interesting that you see the hints of a bro culture, similar to what we talked about on a recent podcast with regard to pilot training in the Air Force. There seems to have developed at Pinterest a bit of a bro culture, such that a person who is in such a powerful position as Francoise Brouwer was chief operating officer. That is the number 2 person in the company. Typically, CFO sometimes could be number 2, in which case they'd be number 3. But they are high up on the leadership team there. And so if she is talking about the rampant discrimination, hostile work environment, and misogyny that permeates the company, she must be coming armed for bear for that lawsuit. She's got to have some pretty good ammunition to bring to the table there. And so it makes you wonder how the culture is being lived at Pinterest. Here's the thing. If you have a platform which is geared towards women, so let's say, for the sake of argument, that you've got a software platform that really appeals to African American women. That's what it's targeted towards, their interests, their likes. And yet, within the leadership of your company, you don't see very many African American women. You might wonder why that is. I think it's kind of natural to do so, because you might get some benefit from having at the leadership table folks that are of a rather similar demographic to your customers. Now, does that mean that the only people who can appeal to African American women are other African American women? No, of course not. If that were the case, then Oprah would not be as popular as she is. Oprah would have a largely black audience, instead of Oprah basically appealing to just about all women. So that's clearly not what I'm trying to allude to. It's just that the absence of that perspective may be a little bit of a blind spot. Now, perhaps Pinterest just has world-class feedback and marketing data from their customers. That means that, hey, a complete surfer boy troglodyte could run the company and still know that what they were producing was going to resonate with the women who make up its largest customer base, because they're just so good. But I think that you've got problems if your company looks down upon your customers. And so if they really are sexist and misogynist, then how do you deliver world-class customer experience and products and services to your customers if you despise them? You know, we're seeing this wider in the culture. It's an aspect of cancel culture, in fact, here in the United States, where people, particularly in creative industries and in tech industries, seem to think that it's okay to treat your customers like garbage. To, in effect, fire your customers. Well, we don't want you as a customer anyway. You don't agree with us on X, Y, and Z. And therefore, you shouldn't be our customer. It's kind of a stupid, counterproductive position to take when you're in business, where it's all about meeting the needs of your customers. And so if you have a bro culture at Pinterest, as Ms. Brouwer alleges, then that's going to create problems for the company, because viewing your customers with contempt is not really a winning strategy. If the purpose of your company is to offer a social media gathering place that appeals overwhelmingly to women, then you had better be pretty down with meeting women's needs. You'd better have a surfeit of respect for women. And if you're going to be a bro when trying to drive the fortunes of such a company, well, then you'd better make a hobby of understanding the appeal of things that appeal to women. Because that's your profession, that's your job, that's your mission. That's the purpose of your company. And your culture really ought to be built around a healthy respect for your female colleagues, shouldn't it? Aren't they customers too? So I would suspect that if what she's saying is true about Pinterest, that you would see issues where collaboration is not particularly valued, where an environment of mutual respect among colleagues is not prized, where there's no such notion as the customer is always right, because that contempt for women cannot help but bleed over into Pinterest customers. And they probably have the kind of tech company culture that you hear about in other places, where the belief is we're so smart that we'll build something that will appeal to you even though it's got no appeal whatsoever to us. We don't believe in it, but we'll build it and it'll be so great that you can't resist it. And all this talk about respect and dignity and all that stuff is just hot air. So this will be an interesting one to keep an eye on, see how the lawsuit proceeds. Generally speaking, it would be in Pinterest's interest to very quickly settle and avoid the damage to their brand, because if the large number of women who are out there using their Pinterest accounts get a whiff that Pinterest is a bunch of social dudes and data nerds who have real issues with women, then you'll see, say, Instagram suddenly become the new Pinterest. And that'll be the death knell for this company. It's never a good idea to target your own customers for extinction. It's really foolish, because you need those customers and their business in order to survive. But I think Pinterest will not be the only company, not the only tech company even, that will go through this kind of epiphany over the next year or so, as the virtue signaling and the social justice warring and the canceling of customers takes hold and reaps its inevitable reward. We saw this, by the way, this week with DC Comics. DC Comics, for some time, like Marvel Comics, like a number of the other comics companies, has been canceling its customers, has been refusing to give its devoted fans what they want, which is great adventure stories of iconic heroes. Instead, for some years now, they've been giving their fans lectures on what they should like instead. It is the most moronic business strategy I've ever seen. And finally, their parent company has decided that they've had enough. And so there's been some major layoffs over at Disney, not at Disney, at DC. Not only, sometimes you'll see it'll be the suits in the business side of the operation get whacked, but they've taken out some people who've driven the creative direction of the comics. And it can't help but send a message through the industry. Marvel is owned by Disney, Marvel Comics. And while the Marvel Comics universe has, under Kevin Feige's leadership to this point, enjoyed remarkable success, the comic books have not of late. Disney itself has really fumbled the ball on a number of things, not least of which being the Star Wars debacle. And they've engaged in similar behavior. And so I think you're going to see something very similar strike Disney and Marvel sooner rather than later as an inevitable consequence of the stupidity that they've unleashed over the last couple of years and how it's alienated their fan base. We've seen Amazon, particularly through the Jeremiads of Jeff Bezos, for the first time attacking its own customers. Given the gains the Walmart is making in the e-commerce space, well, not the best strategy. So we'll see Amazon start to pay the penalty for that as the lockdowns lift and as people are less dependent on the service they offer. We see this in the world of sports entertainment, where ESPN had course corrected prior to the pandemic away from the social justice propaganda they had been spewing that had nothing whatsoever to do with athletics. But then with the pandemic and the BLM movement, they're right back now, having so few sports to cover. They're right back to nonstop left-wing politics all the time. And their subscriber base has dwindled mightily as a result. We see it with the NFL, where they had somewhat put the whole kneeling during the national anthem controversy behind them, and now it's back in force. And so the NFL is doubling down on siding with people who hate America, and that's driven fans away. So they've already got a tough season ahead, given they can't rely on ticket revenue from the games because of the stupid lockdowns. And so you're going to see an outsized impact on the loss of TV revenue. We've seen it with the NBA, where they literally kowtowed to China, and that's been resented by the American public, suffering from the impact of a virus that China unleashed upon the world. And so the NBA ratings are way down. So we're at a time when there's almost no sports to watch. You would think that the return of sports to television would be a big positive development and people would be tuning in droves rather than binge watching 13 Reasons Why. Not the case, because they've made the mistake of treating their best fans and customers as garbage. And so they tune out. Everyone's operating under the assumption that we have no alternative. Well, if you don't watch football, what are you going to do? Tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to watch hockey. Well, what happens if hockey takes a knee? Then I guess I'm going to learn to appreciate rugby, or I'll learn to really enjoy NASCAR. I'll watch something. Worst comes to worst, it may be women's gymnastics. But there has to be some sport somewhere wherein the flag is not trampled underfoot to please a political master somewhere. So the net on this story is, I think we're going to see more of this kind of stuff. I wish Ms. Brower well. I hope she prevails in her lawsuit. And I hope that there's more Browers out there who are willing to take on big tech and demand an end to toxic cultures which get in the way of these companies fulfilling their purpose in the world. And I hope that the shareholders of these companies catch a clue and start demanding that they operate more on the basis of offering products and services to the world than to being clubs for the social advancement of a tiny few. Thank you and have a great day.